People old enough to know of how life was before Rwanda was colonized, as well as cultural and historical experts, attest to the fact that Rwandans lived in harmony and insist that there was no divisionism and that people lived together in peace. People lived in peace, and you found that brotherly love existed in many different ways. There was intermarriage, and families would go to each other's aid. All that showed that people lived in harmony. People were not constantly engaged in disputes over things like property just for the sake of attaining status in society, which is what usually triggers such problems. People helped each other, and those without sought the help of those that had something. What made it possible was good leadership at the time and the fact that people agreed on key issues. All that would change after the country was colonized. Relations started to go sour during the colonial period, and seeds were planted that would ensure that people would not continue to live in harmony. They took Musinga away, killed Rudahigwa, and exiled Chigeri. When political parties arose, they only made things worse, using explosive language, insulting people. Even the king and the white men did nothing. If anything, they encouraged it. Starting in 1959, Tutsis began to be persecuted, killed, and many were forced to flee the country, and yet the colonialists still did nothing to stop it. According to Kayumba, that is when the planning of the genocide against Tutsis actually began, decades before it was eventually executed. They then started the war in 1959, and this I saw with my own eyes. At first, people were afraid to kill, and they taught them to dare to do it, even showing them where to attack, and that is when the seed of genocide was planted, because people were no longer afraid to take a life. Before, diseases would take lives, accidents maybe, but going about murdering people was not commonplace. It was not generally accepted, but that all changed. After independence, what the colonialists had planted began to grow, right through the First and Second Republics, until finally the full horror of that hate manifested itself in the 90s. When you plant something and nurture it, it grows. What they did is that Kayibanda watered those seeds, taking the ideologies of Paramehutu to the next level, writing on them and giving speeches. According to that ideology, the country belonged to Hutus and Tutsis were foreigners. The Twa were not even in the equation. Then came Habyarimana and his coup d'etat of July 5th, 1973. He came promising peace, unity and development for all Rwandans, claiming that is why he had grabbed power, prompting some Tutsis who had fled the country to return, confident that things would change. However, Habyarimana became worse than Kayibanda, taking the doctrines and making sure they were properly entrenched in every aspect of society, in all institutions, even drawing up figures to justify it, allocating how many Tutsis got to go to school or held jobs, saying they were based on the fact that Hutus made up more than 80% of the population anyway. Things only got worse. In 1994, the genocide against Tutsis was implemented, claiming more than 1 million lives in 100 days. And no other genocide in recorded human history has ever been that efficient, not even the Jewish Holocaust of the Second World War. It was devastating enough to leave the country in such ruin. Questions were raised as to whether or not it would ever fully recover. But it did, through the sheer determination of Rwandans to rebuild their country and even develop at a breathtaking pace. After the country was liberated, unity and reconciliation became the foundations upon which everything else would stand, not hate and divisionism as had been the case previously.